Today's episode of Gold Star Stories is one of the most difficult and important we've recorded. I'm speaking with Lyndsey Theobald, widow of Air Force OSI agent Brian Theobald. Brian was a son of Pittsburgh, a diehard sports fan, a gym rat, a teammate, and above all, a husband and father. He served as security forces deployed twice to Iraq while still a teenager and later cross-trained into OSI. On paper, his career was impeccable. In reality, he carried trauma that the system never properly addressed. Lyndsey walks us through who Brian was, the joy and love they built together, and the silent battles he fought after burn pits, combat tours, and years of pressure. She takes us into the week when he finally reached out for help, how the stigma of mental health in the military overshadowed that step, and how a series of decisions ended with his death by suicide. This is not just a story about loss, it's about stigma, silence, family conflict, and what happens when support fails. Lyndsey does not hold back. She speaks openly about the knock at the door, the funeral where she was pushed to the margins, and the long road of raising their daughter in the aftermath. Through all of this, Lyndsey reminds us that Gold Star families are more than symbols. They are living legacies. Her strength is in her perseverance, her willingness to keep going, and her determination that Brian's story and the lessons in it are not forgotten. If you or someone you know is struggling, help is available right now. Call 988 and press 1 for the Veterans Crisis Line or text 838-255. You are not alone. Here is Lyndsey's story.
Marine Captain Brian Latendry died earlier this month in an explosion in Iraq. He was 27, a husband and father, and he was buried in Arlington National Cemetery, a few miles from where he grew up. As America observes Memorial Day,
I have been directed by the President of the United States and the Commandant of the Marine Corps to inform you that today, at 0530, your son was killed in action while in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom.
Not very many of us can accomplish our goals or our dreams, and he always knew where he wanted to go, and he did it.
A Gold Star family is one who has lost a loved one serving in the United States military. It's a distinction no family ever seeks, a bond shared through sacrifice, remembrance, and profound loss. I'm Nick Latendry, and I've been a Gold Star sibling for over 18 years. In those 18 years, I've learned that while ceremonies fade, medals are stored away, and life continues, the story doesn't end for the families left behind. This podcast is dedicated to remembering those who gave everything for their country and to telling the lesser-known stories, the quiet, powerful journeys of grief, strength, resilience, and hope that follows after the flags are folded and the crowds disperse. These are Gold Star Stories. Tell me a little bit about Brian, who he was as a person outside of service.
Yeah, so he was from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So he's a big athlete when it comes to sports teams. And so he was really big into the Pirates and the Penguins and the Steelers. And so outside of his job, he was a great sports team player. Like, he loved watching them. And then we didn't really have a lot of hobbies. We hung out with each other pretty much the whole time. So we really didn't do anything outside of that. But he was really passionate about working out, and he was also big into fitness and just maintaining his mental health through that as well. So yeah, he definitely spent a lot of time in the gym.
Tell me a little bit about how you guys met.
So I was working as a barista on base, and so I would see him in passing. And at that time, he was a police officer. So he had different shifts where he would be coming in and getting little energy drinks and things to keep him fueled through his shift. And that's how we initially met, is he came into my coffee shop and approached me and started having conversation. And I knew a lot about his colleagues just because they were always in and out of the coffee shop. So that's kind of how we initially started talking.
Awesome. So he was in the Air Force, correct? But he was also a police officer. Was that outside of the Air Force? So was this Reserve Air Force or?
Yeah, so he actually did a lot of stuff within and outside the Air Force. So when I first met him, he went into the Air Force as a security forces. So he was a police officer on base. He had done 2 deployments by the time I met him. And so then he was also part of the SWAT team on base. He did a lot of security detail in local cities around our base. So he would go and do extra jobs. He was also big into martial arts training and combative training. So he did like Krav Maga, and he did all different types of tactical training that he prepared himself for because of the SWAT team that was on base. So that was something that he elected to do himself. And then as well as he actually he trained the people to deploy. So whenever they came up for deployment, they went out to this little place out on the base, and he basically teach them different skill sets in order to survive when in combat zones. So he did that as well as becoming that police officer. And so he eventually cross-trained, and he went into OSI in 2013 is when he started that process. And he cross-trained in 2014 to OSI.
Okay. So you guys met around 2008, is that correct?
Met towards the end of 2008. We got married in 2010.
So tell me a little bit about marriage life and his service. Was he deployed at all while you were married?
No, so I met him when he had just come back from his second deployment. He went to Buka, and then he went to Tatilil in Iraq prior to us meeting. When we did meet, he actually was supposed to be scheduled to go to Haiti back when the Haiti disaster happened, but I found out I was pregnant, and they actually were really able to keep him home during that disaster, so he stayed with me. So we went to England, the UK in 2011, and we were stationed in Mildenhall for a period of time, and his assignment there was to be a special forces. So he was in tons of training camps. He did a lot of tactical training, like he went to Raven and all different types of things that he had to do to train to when they went into combat zones that they would secure the plane. And so he did a lot of base exercises. And in England specifically, he was gone a lot of the time to go and do trainings or go and do missions. And so during that time frame, I wasn't working when we lived in England. So I actually took a lot of the military aircrafts because Mildenhall was a massive refueling place where people pit stopped to go overseas or go to the Middle East. And so there's a lot of planes that were coming in and out of that place to the United States and then all the way further east and into Middle East and Iraq and Germany, places like that. So I took my child at the time, and we would get on these military aircrafts, and we would go back to the States to visit family while he was in trainings and missions and stuff like that. So there's a large period of time in England that he actually wasn't around, that he was doing a lot of training and missions.
So you said he was in Iraq for a little bit. That would have been between 06 and 08. Is that correct?
Yep.
Did that have any effect on him whatsoever? I know that was a rough time to have been over in that area.
Yep. So one of his first missions, he was in, I don't know if it was Buka or Talil, but there was burn pits. And so he was involved in that. Another instance he had told me about was they had prison camps there in the area where he was stationed. And there was a lot of suicide bombings, a lot of events like that. So his 2 times in Iraq, from what I was told, because I didn't meet him until after these two episodes, that he actually came back just a very changed person. I think he was turning 19 on the plane to Iraq, his first tour. So he was very, very young when he first went, and I believe that was an 8-month stint. And so he did 2 tours by those times, and so there was a lot of experiences. And looking back on it now, he 100% had PTSD from those experiences. I know Agent Orange is a huge thing from the burn pits. So there was a lot of experiences that he was a part of that really changed his mental frame of mind. And so when I met him, I did see a lot of episodes of him having flashbacks and bad dreams, things like that, where, for him, he was just managing it. He was just trying to take care of it as it came and gone. And from what he would say, our child and myself helped him ease that PTSD issues, and it kind of gave him a new light to keep his head on straight. And so for the longest time, that's what it was, is he kind of put all those PTSD symptoms at bay to continue on his journey through the military life that he had.
Do you feel like he ever reached out to try to get help about PTSD? I know back then it was not as common for a lot of these guys to go and try to get help.
Yeah.
Was that available, or was that something you feel like he put himself into work in working out and stuff to try to get over?
So it's interesting because Brian's unit in England had their own medical care. They had their own buildings. And so whenever people were having issues within their unit, it was a 352nd SOG, they had resources on the base that they could tend to that wasn't with the hospital. And so funny enough, 2012, I started having some issues with some of my post PTSD from childhood, and it was really starting to affect the way I was parenting. So we were married very young. We kind of grew up with each other in that sense. And so I actually had started to reach out for help for myself. Back then, it was in him and I's agreement to each other that if I was to get help, he was going to start addressing some of his issues. And so I went through with my journey to really start to hash out some of the issues I had experienced a lot in my life. And he kind of put things at bay where he didn't really start addressing any of it. And then he would go on missions, things would happen. And so it just kind of always got pushed back, that he really never addressed it. And the interesting part of his mental journey is that when he actually cross-trained to become a federal agent back in 2012-13 is when he started that process. And during this process, it's a lot of interviewing. It's a lot of talking to coworkers. It's talking to family members. It's even talking to people that don't like you, just so they can get a grasp on who this individual is that wants to be a federal agent. And so I was interviewed. He was interviewed. He would never bring that part of his life up. He never brought up the struggles that he endured. And so he bypassed that whole process with them, putting it on the back burner, because I know he felt that if you were to put your mental health out there, there's such a stigma against it in the military. It's a pride thing. It's almost like they feel like they get looked down on for having any type of mental issues. And I hate to say it this way, but it was like a don't ask, don't tell. You don't address those kinds of issues. You don't address the things that you're going through in your mind. And so he made do by trying to deal with it himself for the longest time. And my husband decided to go see a chaplain a week before he died. And he was a federal agent at the time. So federal agents on base, wherever they go, they're in a suit and tie, but they're always carrying a weapon. They always have. That was the protocol for his squadron, is that you always carry a service weapon. And so a week before he passed, he goes to the chaplain and on base, and he's like, I need help. I think I'm going to lose my marriage. I don't know what's going on. I'm suffering and I don't know what to do about this. The chaplain said, look, Brian, you need to go to mental health. We need to address this. I'm sorry to say that. We have to address this, but you're in the right place. I'm here to help you. It was on a Wednesday, I believe. He needed to go to mental health on that Friday. And he knew what he needed to do. The chaplain, later recited to me that, like, he knew what he was going to do. He knew the plan that he was going to take to save his marriage, to save his life, that he needed to address. And so he was going to go and take those steps. And I have it written in letters because during that time he was writing a lot. And he was like, I know what I need to do. I have to go get help. And Friday came around. So chaplain tells Brian's squadron, hey, look, he's having some issues. There's mental health issues. And so their first thing is they take away his service weapon. And in his career field, in his squadron, it says a lot. And it's almost like eyes are on you if you're walking around as a federal agent with a badge and you don't have a weapon. And so it immediately hit him on that personal level that people were going to start looking at him and people were going to be like, why does he not have a service weapon? And so he was going through it in his mind with that process, because he knew that if he was walking around and people saw that he didn't have that there was a concern there, but because it always relied on mental health. It was always down to that. And so my husband decided to flee town on that Friday, and he left, and he didn't go to mental health. They took a service weapon away. He dipped town. He took our child, and he actually went up to Pittsburgh, which was about 4 hours north of where we were living in, near Andrews Air Force Base. So he didn't go. And that was a big concern, obviously. He goes up to Pittsburgh and he has a mental breakdown, and they ended up putting him in the hospital because he was having some serious issues. And during this time, I'd say within the last month of his life, there's a lot of odd behaviors that he was demonstrating. Like he would bang his head against the wall. He was dipping and swallowing, and just like all these weird things that he was doing that was very out of character. But he was convincing me that he was like, I'm getting help, I'm going to get help. I'm going to take care of myself. I got to take care of myself. This is what I need to do to save us. And so he dipped town. He didn't want me coming up to Pittsburgh, but he ended up coming home on Sunday. He's like, I know what I'm going to do. I need to go to mental health tomorrow. I've got it all lined out. Don't worry about me. I'm good. And so he goes back to work on Monday, and he convinced his superior to give him his service weapon back and told him that nothing was wrong with him. And they didn't follow through with follow up on any of it. They just took him as his word and said, look, if he says he's fine, he's fine. And my husband took his life the next day with a service weapon. And he had written his letters out. The chaplain said when they came to me that night, they said that he knew what he was going to do. They just were blindsided at the direction he took from it, because when he went to chaplain the week before, they said, well, he knows what he's going to do. He's going to get help. He's going to do all these things. And he ended up going in that direction. And so he written letters. He had letters in his truck. He took his life in his vehicle down in National Harbor in DC area, and a lady found him in his vehicle. And so they came to my house, obviously, that with the chaplains that night. In his letters that he left in his car, he apologized to his superiors for manipulating them, knowing that he was going to do what he's going to do anyways, and that he just wanted anybody out of his way to go ahead and proceed with what he wanted. And I believe that changed protocol in their squadron, their division, because of how that was handled. I mean, this was a man that was actually investigating suicides himself and investigating crimes in the military. And for him to go and, do that to everybody, it was blindsiding by everybody. And the toughest part of that was I was blamed for that. I was blamed for every part of that. And his family came after me pretty hard over his death. And it wasn't really everyone had it made it up in their minds that I was the person that caused his death. And so I've had to live with that since he died. Yeah, he definitely manipulated a lot of people. And then he hid letters in our home. And I went and found different letters that he had written, and almost like lyrics to music, because he was a music fan. He was big into music. That was his life. And he wrote them in the form of lyrics, and, had a conversation with our child before he left that morning. And so, yeah, he chose to get help, but obviously way too late in his life to make that determination, because he needed it a lot sooner than that.
With him doing investigations related to suicide, since starting this podcast, I've done a lot of I'm not sure if it's research, but I've just spoken to a lot of people in regards to, suicide and the mindset. One of our very good friends works at the VA. She's one of the last lines of defense for guys that are, possibly thinking about suicide. One of the things that I find interesting is that it's, what's the right word for it? Infectious almost.
Yeah.
And that always makes me curious, I guess, if, him being around it and investigating it is part of what, led to that as well. It's a shame that he didn't have better options. I know that a lot of these guys don't want to get help because they don't want to have to relive the traumas that have caused it. And previous treatments used to basically involve that. You had to talk about it to get through it. I was invited out recently to go check out a new therapy called ETMS. Have you heard of that one?
No.
So it's a new therapy.
I've done EMDR. I've even heard of ketamine, people doing ketamine, but I've done a lot of, I'm in therapy. I'm still in therapy, but I've done EMDR, which is another one where they basically have you relive the instance, but they retrain your brain onto how to react or how the perception of it is. But that's therapy in general, I feel like.
Is pretty wild. I have a good friend that is actually doing it. She does the treatments for it. I had no idea. She just invited me out there one day because she heard that I was doing this Gold Star Stories thing. And you don't have to relive any of it. It's basically a magnet they put on your brain. And this magnet they put on there helps open up those pathways to allow a different way of thinking. So it's revolutionary.
Wow.
In Florida,
Yeah.
they're actually offering it free right now for first responders and military, because it is that groundbreaking. Incredible. And it's a one-time therapy. Like, they do it, I think it's 20 sessions, 21-hour sessions in the course of 20 days or a month or whatever. And the likelihood of them having to redo it again is very slim.
You said it's called EMS?
ETMS.
ETMS.
And it is nationwide.
Yeah.
I met the guy that's does it here in Florida and I think a few other states as well. And their entire thing is helping people. My first thought, obviously, from my perspective, other than helping the military, was helping some of these Gold Star families that just can't get through this, don't want to have to relive this stuff. The ETMS is just a game changer.
That sounds like a game. I mean, that's incredible because I think there has to be more options. And I don't think anybody, most military, especially men, don't want to talk about it. They don't want to rehash out those feelings and those emotions and that trauma. And I know that Brian is one of many people that just choose to try and deal with it themselves, and they try to cope and, oh, I've been doing it this long, I can make it, and unfortunately you really got to unpack that in your head and your feelings to really be able to move forward with it. So that's a very interesting. I'm so glad though, because if I had, gosh, I think a lot of Gold Star spouses can say this. Like, if you just had 10 minutes, if you just had a little bit more time with that person if I would have known where this would have gone. And the reason why, it's interesting when you talk about like being surrounded by people like him investigating suicide. There's so many instances where he's had comrades take their lives, and it's always been that same reaction. Well, I could never do that to my family. I could never do that to my family. Look at his mother. Look how ill she looks because of what he chose to do. And Brian had several of his colleagues, people that he went to war with, take their lives, and they build it up that they would just, how could you ever? I could never. And so it's like, it's interesting because then they just kind of put out this persona. And looking back on it, I think Brian's always suffered in a way, and to see his comrades do that, I mean, he made it seem like it was such an easy way out on dealing with your traumas, and then for him to do it, you know what I mean? It's an interesting concept because I hear a lot of people speak in those terms. Oh, look at him, like he did this to his family. How could he do that? And then you find yourself in the same mental space. And I think that's one of the hardest parts of me dealing with suicide from him, is that I've almost put myself mentally in the place. How low and deep is that feeling for you to say there's no other way? There's no other way to live this life than for me to exit. And so, like, to get that low in your head space, I took a lot of time to analyze that from my perspective, because I needed to be at peace with his decision and understand that what he did in his head, he thought there was no other way to escape what he was going through, and that was the only way he was going to get out of it. And it's so wild to me, and I don't know if a lot of Gold Star spouses or any spouse or widow finds themselves in this headspace that says that really just tries to understand that decision and tries to, I don't want to say even put yourself there, but put yourself there, like the trenches of your own mind, and to find how that would feel. And I've always struggled with that because I've made peace with his decision, and I think now looking back on it, I understand that mental trench of your mind. And I still battle I have good days and bad days as well, with PTSD. I still battle it. But to find yourself in that situation, and to find yourself in a mental headspace where you really don't have another exit plan, and then you're almost tunnel visioned to seeing any outside love and support and the gratitude that people show you, that you are worth something and you have made such a huge impact. I mean, Brian's career was impeccable. He made E6 in, I think it was like 7 years. I mean, he had an incredible military career where he was very honored, and people looked after him like he was an awesome comrade. People loved him for everything he stood for. And then for him not to feel that himself, that's the sad part of suicide, is to see how terribly they really were doing mentally. And as a wife, it's almost like you feel like you failed them. Like, and the thing is, the craziest thing too is that he, throughout our whole marriage, said, there's nothing, no matter what you do or say, I will never be okay with myself. And he always said that. He had this perfectionist mentality. I will never be okay with myself. I said, well, what, you have a child, we're here, I'm here to support you. I put everything in my life on hold to support his career, and that meant moving around, that meant taking care of the house and the child. Like, he needed to go do what he needed to do, and I understood my place with that. And so I was always there as the backbone to make sure that everything was okay. And so for him to not to feel so low and to not see the love and support, and how much he made a difference in this world. That's the gut-wrenching part of suicide, is the mental aspect of it.
And I think you said it, everybody looked up to him. He had an impeccable, career. So I'm sure in his
Mhm.
mind to, ask for help, to reach out and show vulnerability in his field was just not an option for a lot of these guys.
It
And
wasn't. No.
I've been around
That's the
enough to understand that it is what it is, which I'm not trying to like continually pump this therapy, but that's what makes this groundbreaking for these guys.
Yeah.
They don't have to admit defeat necessarily and say, "Hey, I've got to relive this. I've got to talk to somebody about this." It's
Yeah.
literally just a magnet that I guess you feel tapping on the head is what they said, and that
Yeah,
ends up
and
fixing
you're
it.
right though, you don't to actually have to admit defeat. And the saddest thing is it's this military. I mean, we're not talking about a recent new 10 years of military experience. This has been going on for a long time in the military. And my next door neighbor's husband took his life a week before Easter this year in his house. And it was a military, he was a service member. He served 10, she said 10 or 11 deployments. I mean, impeccable career. And you're right though, like it is almost like and I can see how they would think it would be like admitting defeat and being vulnerable. I think a lot of people in military say vulnerability is weakness, and you don't show weakness. You don't show the vulnerability. And so I'm happy to see. I really hope the ETMS really, I hope it gets to the right people, that they're able to set that stigma aside and say, look, for my own well-being, and you don't even have to tell anybody about it. Admitting defeat is in front of a crowd, and you can be going through these issues for yourself, and you could do something like that and not fear
Yep.
the
And at least the
repercussions.
place that I went to, it was a beautiful office. It's a private room. I know the woman that gives it. She's very sweet, very kind, very understanding. So there'd be no
Wow.
stigma whatsoever about going in there and just
Yeah.
getting it taken care of. So it's something that I want to make sure that I continually bring up on here, just to show options to
Yeah.
people, because as we talk about this stuff, obviously, I talked about how it's almost infectious. You talk about these things and, it can spread because of that. I want to make sure people understand that there is options out there. Technology is
I would love to,
getting better.
yeah. I would love to share that with people. Just,
I can
I
send you
still
some more
have some
information on
friends are
it too after
military.
this. I'll send you the website and stuff that they sent me so that you can see about it. And
Perfect.
absolutely incredible. But I want to go back a little bit, if you don't mind. You said that you feel like you had a lot of blame placed on you from family. Do you mind
Yeah.
talking about that a little bit?
Yeah. So my husband and I, like I said, we were married. I was married at 19, he was 20. So when he passed, I was 25. So we were very young. He was 27, I was 25 at the time. My husband and I really never had any marital issues. Now, we had internal problems. I had PTSD from childhood trauma. Brian dealt with his PTSD from his own trauma. And so we didn't really suffer in a marriage. We suffered within ourselves. And so I decided to get help, and he did not. And so in the last month of his life, him and I started having some issues with communication. It was the first time in all of our years of marriage that I actually decided to work. I wanted to get back out there. My child was going to start kindergarten. I wanted to start contributing. And so him and I had to split the time that we were sharing to support Amberlin, where initially it was really all me because of his decision to, serve. And so I was always there. I was, taking care of her. And that really took a toll on us because he was always gone. He was always on missions. He was always away. And so for him to be a parent was really tough for him to acclimate to. And so him and I started having miscommunications where I was working and he wasn't, and then we'd flip schedules. And so him and I had some issues within the last month of his marriage, and there was a lot of disconnect. There's a lot of issues that were going on, and I was in therapy at the time where I was still trying to deal with some of my own PTSD. But his behavior and his actions started to change, and I didn't know how to deal with that. And so, like I think I told you earlier, there'd be times where I'd come home and he was banging his head on the wall. There was times that he would call me when I was at work, and he would have Amberlynn on the phone with him, and he'd be just crying and not really having a rhyme or reason for it, but just tears, and she was crying, and so there's a lot of funky, weird things that were going on that I really didn't know how to understand. And so him and I really started to build a little distance between us, because I didn't know how to cope with what he was going through, and I was trying to deal with my own issues as it was. And so we had a little disconnect. I remember 4th of July that year, he actually went up north to Pittsburgh. I stayed home and worked. And so then I had a friend, and she and I would hang out, and we'd go into DC together, and we would go around. And so I built a friendship. This was the first time I actually had a friend. And so I was hanging out with her, and he was starting to struggle in his career, where he was a perfectionist. Everything had to be perfect. Everything had to be to a T. He started having issues with his weight, and he started having issues where he wasn't doing anything to the T. And because he had just cross-trained into this career field, he was still trying to acclimate and get used to the rhythm of it. And so there was times where we were separating ourselves from one another, and we were just kind of doing our own thing. And I was working, he was working, but then we'd only see each other for a couple hours, and then we'd go right back into the schedule again. And so it really wasn't a lot of time we were spending with each other. And when it came to be, so when he went up to North after fleeing the chaplain and not going to mental health on that Friday, he went up north to his hometown, to his parents. He collapsed, and the doctor said, look, you're having anxiety attacks. You need to calm down. And, and they gave him, I think, some Vicodin or something like that. They gave him something. And at that point in time, his parents were like, she's an evil bitch of a wife. She's doing this all to you. I'm the evil bitch. And at the time, I was like, you know what? They are who they are. I'm not going to sit here and argue semantics over my relationship with him. And so I remember he came back, and he was dipping, and he was swallowing, and just like I said, the weird behavior continued. And so when he died, when he took his life that morning, his parents, the first thing they did was come after me and say, look, this is on you. You're an evil bitch of a wife. You have to take the accountability. You need to own his death. And at the time, I'm 25 years old. There's no rule book. There's no manual that you get when this kind of shit happens and when you go through it. And so I was the POD. I was the person disposition on his death, and I was to make the arrangements. And after he passed, his mom called me, says, just give me my son back. Give me my son back. And I said, okay. I said, I will send him to Pittsburgh, to Allegheny Cemetery, if that's what their wishes are. And I signed off to have him moved up there. And I did not know about any of his services. I wasn't told about his wake service. I wasn't told about the Catholic service. I knew where he was going to be buried, and that was it. I found out about his services on Facebook from a friend, because they refused to give me any insight on his death, on his stuff. I chose out the casket. I chose out the limo service to travel to the cemetery. I chose out all this stuff. I was the person who made those calls. They took all of that. And so when I found out about his services, my family that had flown in from Washington to Maryland to be with me for that time, we had a little service outside the base, because I think that's like their customary thing, is they had to have a service. We're service people. So we go in, and his casket's there, and I absolutely lose my shit. Like, it's just a detrimental time. And so from there, they transport his body, and I had no idea when or where that was. And so finally someone told me, look, his wake services are on this day, and his Catholic services are on this day. And I show up because I'm his wife and I have his child, and the funeral director had no idea who I was. They had all these pictures posted all over this wake service, all pictures of him and his family, nothing of us, nothing. And so I'm sitting there and just can't grasp what's going on. And his family makes all these arrangements, doesn't say much of words to me at all when I'm there. It was an 8-hour day, and they wanted us to sit in there that whole 8 hours. And so finally I had sat down, and I found this out actually just a couple weeks ago from my father, that my husband's uncle sat across from the room that I was sitting in and stared at me the entire time I was there. And I didn't really think about that. And so he was just staring at me, and my dad said it was really uncomfortable. He couldn't notice it, but it was such a I wasn't in my right frame of mind for anything for that time. And so they had the services, and then they had a church service the next day at his Catholic church. And of course, sitting in the back, nobody wants me to be around at all. And so we sat in the back of the service, and his friends bring him in the casket. And so then they do their service and they bring him back out to the limo and to this court hearse. And I'm supposed to get in the limo. His family all gets in. And then they arranged the car line behind him so that my family couldn't be in it. Like, they ranged it so far back that my parents had to be the last cars in the line because they didn't want us around, and like that's how they treated us. And so we go, and I said, look, I paid for this limo. I'm going to be in it. And so I took my daughter and I got in the limo and I sat with his family in this limo, and they would not say a word to me. Didn't want to talk to me. I just sat there and I was like in disbelief that this was really actually happening. And so we go up to the gazebo area where they put his body, and I'm in the matriarch position where I'm supposed to receive the flag. They folded up the flag on his casket and they gave it to his dad. They folded up another flag, they gave it to his mom. Someone had to stop the guy and say, that's his wife. And then they found a flag off to the side and they gave it to me. And that's how it ended. So I wasn't even, and his superiors were there, his squadron leaders were there. And so this happens, right? And they fold up those flags, they give it to his parents. They gave two to his parents. His child walks away with absolutely nothing in her hands. And so as soon as they gave me that flag, I ran and I collapsed out on the grass, and I was just in so much disbelief that this was actually happening. And so finally, like one of my husband's best friends said, at the end of the day, he didn't choose his family, but he chose you. You need to believe that. And they expected us to go to like a huge dinner and stuff with them. I'm like, this is absolutely crazy to me that this is how you guys treat. Well, that's what you get. You're an evil bitch of a wife. This is what you get. And so that's how it ended for us. That's how I said goodbye to him for the last time. And my daughter has tidbits. He committed suicide in exactly a week before her birthday. So I had to throw a birthday party in the middle of all this. And it was one of the most detrimental ways to say goodbye and to have it happen that way. And because they blamed me, they thought I deserved it. And then later find out that my husband put his SGLI in his parents' name, so I didn't get anything. And they chose not to help me because they blamed me for his death. And so for the longest time, I sat in sorrow for that. And I honestly thought I deserved it because it was like, wow, was I really that bad? Was I really that terrible of a person that he didn't get help? And now I'm being the scapegoat. And that's exactly what I was. And so his family refused to be supportive of me, despite Brian's suicide letter saying, please support my child and wife. They need you. They stopped having any part of me. And then later they tried getting to my child, and they said, we're going to get her one way or another. She's the last piece of your Brian. We want her. And so I had to pick up and move out of that area because they would just come down and circle around my house and drive around my house. And so it just got to be so intense that I picked up and left, and I picked Wilmington on a map and I moved here a little bit after that. And so I've had to deal with that. I mean, I'm sure it's still the case for them. We don't have a relationship with them at all. And it's really not in the best interest for her, Amberlyn, just because they've never once asked about her. They've never once said, how is she doing? Where's her process at? How is she grieving? She's got the longest road out of all of us. She has to pick up her pieces throughout her whole life to deal with this. And my goal was to prepare myself for her in the sense that I'm going to go get help. I'm going to seek help. I'm going to be an advocate for mental health to make sure that she knows that it is important. And so I've continued that journey with her where she's been in therapy since she was 7. And we've continued to work on bettering ourselves. And I've had to learn to be at peace with the decisions that were made because this family sees no wrong in what they've done. They don't see any wrong that they got flags on the casket, and they did not do anything to make any of that right. And when I called the casualty affairs officer and I told them what had gone on, I was a silenced voice. Nobody wanted to hear anything I had to say. I tried calling the funeral home to say, hey, look, did you not know who we were? They won't even speak to me. And so no one's ever tried to make it right. No one's ever tried to fix what had been wronged with that whole ceremony service and what they did. And my husband's friends, they actually went and got a flag and folded it up and gave it to Anne Boleyn, our child, and said, this is what matters. And they gave it to her, and that was the way that they tried to make peace with what had happened. And so that was probably more detrimental to our mental health than having to deal with his death, because of how that was treated. And I had people online telling me, you just need to own it, take your accountability, that you did this and this is your fault. And for the longest time, I was 25 when he passed. I was very remorseful for a long time, and to the point where I actually took Anne Boleyn up to Pittsburgh in 2017 to see his family, and I felt so awful about them blaming me, and the whole situation I was so manipulated in. And so I take her up there in 2017, and they parade her around to her family, and took her to some services that honored Brian. I dropped her off on a Friday, I picked her up on a Sunday, and she absolutely bawled her eyes out all the way home because she didn't eat, she didn't sleep, and they were just kind of parading her around, and she was so uncomfortable with the whole situation. And obviously she didn't have a phone or anything, and they weren't going to tell me that she was suffering. But when I picked her up to take her home to Wilmington, she just cried the entire 7-hour drive. And I said, what's going on? And I kept trying to understand where she was coming from. And she was so traumatized. She did not know. She didn't like that she was in that house when her dad wasn't there. She didn't like that she was not being addressed on her mental health. They were just kind of buying her stuff and trying to win her back in certain ways. And it wasn't that for her. She felt so odd, and she didn't feel comfortable. And so finally, when I picked her up and I took her home, they're like, oh, that's you. You're the brainwashing. This is you. And it's like, no matter what I try to do or say, I think they've made up their mind when it comes to me. And so anytime that I've tried to make them happy by doing something to try and help, it's always been pushed right back in my face that I'm an evil bitch that caused this. And so I've had to live with that. It's been 10 years now, and I've had to completely start over. I had to file bankruptcy in 2020 because I lost everything, because I didn't have that support. And so I've had to start all over from the ground up, trying to overcome all these issues that has happened. And and as of today, like, Amber Lynn is 15 years old. She has a choice if she wants to have a relationship with his family, and anytime she chooses to want that, I've always said, look, you know what, we will do what we need to do to make you have a relationship with them. I'm fine. I will always put myself aside, because her mental health and her well-being is the important part of this. And anytime they've tried to come out and talk to her, they've been disrespectful. They've not honored her wishes. Like, just last year, they tried getting her phone number, and we said no. And they went around it anyways, and they texted her anyways. And so it's like, there's just a lot of disrespect there with them. And so we're choosing to honor Brian the way that we know. And I'm raising her the way that him and I would have done it together. And so we've had to just separate ourselves from the toxic environment. And I don't think they're never going to see me in any other light than what they're seeing me as. I mean, there's nothing really I can do about that. I have to be at peace with that decision, and knowing that through my own therapy, through my own mental health journey, that I'm not the person that needs to take accountability for his passing. It's him that takes accountability for the way he passed, his suffering, his inability to get help, and his inability to process his own trauma. And it's taken me a long time to get out of that, because for the longest time I did believe that I didn't deserve anything, that I didn't deserve happiness, or that I didn't deserve to move on with my life, because it was like they wanted my head. They wanted anything part of me. Like, I hate to say this, one of Brian's siblings texted my daughter saying that she would kill for her, and the kid was 10 at the time. And so, like, I've just separated ourselves from them, because it's just never been in our well-being or her well-being to have them as a relationship with us. And so it's been very detrimental to how we've been able to grieve his death. And I think that we're doing better with it now. Like, we learn to overcome certain mental aspects to his death and just understand things from a different perspective. But, our journey is all on ours, and there's no rule book, there's no manual that tells you this is how you behave when he dies. This is how you behave when she dies. This is how you handle yourself after death. It's like there's no rule books. And so I never judge anybody when they're coming out, especially when they're dealing with trauma, because you never know what place they're really in. And I've had to take myself out of mental trenches a few times to not blame myself, or to not let the terrible people that want to blame me get to me to the point where I want to take my own life. That's a rare, really real possibility, that people in my situation are people that have to cope with death, especially from a spouse, and then you're getting blamed. I mean, I don't think people realize how much that takes, what that does to a person. You're putting a life on someone's conscience, and then you're going to sit there and say, well, I deserve it. It's like, that's so terrible. Like, and that's the shitty part about death, is it changes people and how people act and behave afterwards. And
Well,
I
everybody
mean,
wants to
hell,
find somebody to blame, right? That's
every
they got to
time,
place it on somewhere, and unfortunately, that fell on you. In 25 years old, I mean, you're not even a fully
yeah,
formed adult, really, in your head yet. You're
no,
not. That is just unreal to me. I'm so sorry that you had to go through all that.
it's funny too, because I've had to grow from this and learn from it. And the more I've grown and looked back, like it's been 10 years now this year, I look back at a 25-year-old self, and the fact that people were expecting me to hold it all together and keep it together, or that I was going to go to a service that I wasn't even invited to and be able to behave myself, it's like I could not understand why people would feel that way, especially when they're older people. They're not even, they're not my age or anything, but 25 years old, and you got to figure out how to put it all together. And it's been such a tough. Mental health is so important, and it's so crucial to overcoming things like this. And I've done some very, I've had some tough conversations with myself to really overcome the detrimental feelings that I've had for my own self, because I'd never expected myself in the situation. I never expect myself to be blamed, but at the end of the day, I have to take care of me. I have to take care of my kids, and if I'm not at my best, what am I doing? And so I do everything I can. I take breaks. I mentally, I have therapy at 1 today. Like, I'm doing everything I can to really overcome myself from to finding myself in such a depressive mood, because I have depression. It sucks, but there are days that it's very difficult to overcome your own mental trench. So, but I'm doing the best I can with it.
I'm blown away at all that you've endured. You were informed still, you got a knock on the door still from a chaplain and a casualty assistance officer. Can you take me back to that real quick?
Yeah. So I remember that day specifically because in the DMV area, the traffic was so horrendous. I didn't get home. That day, what had happened, he'd left at like 9 a.m. I had to go get my car serviced, and then I found out that he had not taken our child to childcare, and so I got a call from them saying that he wasn't around. And so I started calling him, calling him, didn't know where he was. And so I finally went and picked up our child, and I came home, and it was about between 7 and 9 o'clock at night. The line of cars shows up at my house with the chaplain, and they tell me that my husband has taken his life. And I remember falling all over the floor. I I could not keep myself together to save my life. And my child was just wondering what was going on. Luckily, my husband's best friend was in Virginia Beach, so he was about 2 hours, 3 hours away. He immediately drives to me. Um, he's the one who told my child that her dad had passed. And so they came to my door and they said, look, this is what's the situation. I'm sorry. When he saw me last week, he said he knew what he was doing. He said that he knew what direction he was going to take. And the chaplain said, I'm so sorry. I did not think it was this chap. I didn't know it was this. I thought that he was going to mental health, and I thought he was going to go get help for himself. And so they left, they made sure I had someone there before they left me alone. And so finally, some people show up to help me. And from the next couple of days, I mean, his family, his friends just started traveling in. He had one of his best friends was also an OSI agent, but he was in Korea. He flew in. And so I was surrounded by a lot of his friends. And then one of his family members came to be by me, and at the time I didn't think of that he was being malicious or any way, but then I found out later that he was, and he was just trying to get intel and details so that he could go back to Brian's family. And so I was interviewed. I was, I did all the proceeds to make sure that I had chose out all the decisions that I needed to choose, and then I found out I was not a recipient of the SGLI or the GI Bill, and so we had to make those arrangements to make sure, and then I had to throw a birthday party at Chuck E. Cheese for my child.
Jesus.
Within the week that we had to go to Pittsburgh. So yeah, the chaplain is, I think that's the one fear that every military wife has or military spouse has, is you never want a chaplain at your door. And that is a very detrimental feeling. It's something that you can never shake. You can remember exactly how it felt. And then my child also remembers how it felt for her as well. So, that happened, and we didn't send his body back up to Pittsburgh until a week later. And in that process, obviously, I just, I had a casualty affairs officer that was from the Pentagon. She walked me through all those steps and all the decisions I needed to make for myself. And so I did that. And after his funeral services, no one ever really, I don't even know who I know who my casualty affairs officer is right now, but I have not met him in years. Like there is no concern for widows, and from my own experience, like I had a casualty affairs officer up there that she was very informative and she was helpful, but after the services, it's like they just leave you alone and they don't tell you anything. Like when there's changes that come up, because there's a lot of things that go on with our benefits and stuff, my casualty affairs officer doesn't even speak to me. I couldn't even tell you if he's still alive or not. Like there's no concern. There's no one that keeps you informed or up to date or anything like that. And so they just kind of leave you alone. And this whole persona, and I remember when Brian's superiors came to my house after death and they said, well, we've never had someone kill themselves over their wife. And they said that to me in an interview after he died. And I just looked dumbstruck. I was like, man, like, I know that Brian probably put it out there enough for them to perceive it was one thing that was going on, but I don't think they had any idea that he was suffering in other ways. They just thought it was me. And so they said that to me. And from then on, like, they basically always left me alone. They've never really been concerned about who I am, where I am, what I'm doing. Can I help you? Do you need help? Is there anything we can do for you? Nothing. And for me, it's like, it just kind of reaffirmed for me that they thought the same thing that his parents did, that I was the one that caused his death. And so that's how they've always seemed to be. That's what their actions tell me, is that that's what they think. And so I don't have any support from the military from them. Like nobody ever reaches out to me or tries to even be concerned. And if I want to get involved in organizations like TAPS or Gary Sinise Foundation's great, I get involved with them, but I don't do a whole lot of extensive reaching out because it's difficult, and I don't want to keep hashing out terrible experiences where it doesn't, I don't know if it does me any good personally to continue to hash that stuff out. But there's no support, and I don't know if it's just me or if many spouses. Can you tell me, like, whether the people you've interviewed before, do they have that same consensus, or are they pretty still involved with CAO?
No, it's pretty common that it's after death they get left alone. Nobody will do anything unless we keep causing a stink. The voice of Gold Star families seems to get muted very quickly after everything happens.
Yeah.
And we can tell just by talking to you, 10 years on, you're still feeling this. I'm pushing 20 years and I still feel it,
Yeah.
There's not a
And
time limit to this.
God, and I hate to be someone that's, I don't know why, but the whole thing around it is that the military, you're signing up to go protect your country, and you're supposed to go do these things that the military wants you to do. And Brian told me well enough, service before self. That was the thing. And they go out there and do these things. My husband was either 18 or 19 on the plane ride to Iraq the first time he went. And they put them through the fucking ringer with, there's so many things that go on over there. I mean, my next door neighbor that took his life, we heard about the things that he went through just earlier this year. And it's like they are going through so many things, so many contributing factors. There's no way in hell you come out of that a good, like a sane person. You have to have protocols or something that says, hey, look, we need to get these people some type of mental health because we just threw them in hell and then bring them back and then they got to acclimate to normal life. It's not going to happen. Like you got to have tools and resources to help you along this way to acclimate, and who was that? Chris Kyle. I mean, perfect example, the movie about him. He tried to acclimate. He gave back his time to helping other veterans, and like these things that are happening and people are like, how do you go back at 19 years old from seeing burn pits for 6 to 8 months? You come back and be like, okay, I'm normal. Let's keep going. Like, why isn't there the fundamental process to help these people? And I'm not even in the service. I'm just a person that deals with the aftermath of it. And it's like I could not imagine how the military lets us go on, and why is it still to this day the protocol to not address these concerns for people? I
Yeah,
don't understand that.
I go back to my brother in 2003. He was in Iraq, and he both my brothers were over in the Middle East at the same time in 2003. My brother Brian came back. We went up to Massachusetts to go visit family, and he had a breakdown just from
Right.
PTSD. And I'd never seen him cry before in my life. And I remember all my uncles, my cousins, everybody was there for him, trying to console him, but he was just not a good space. So then
Yeah.
in 2006, he volunteered to go back over. He had a wife, he had a kid. Do you think that possibly he volunteered because of the trauma that he endured back in 2003? He wasn't, it wasn't in order to go. He
Yeah.
volunteered to go over there and then he lost his life. That's the kind of stuff to me that is just like, obviously these are such common occurrences that, and I'm not sure, maybe there is something in place now that when these guys get back from these traumatic experiences, they do go through counseling, but I feel like they probably don't, or at least not to the
I think it's
level.
manipulative. I think that the protocol is very simple and basic, and then they go through a questionnaire and they're good. Because I do know that Brian would go through protocol when he'd get back from a mission and they would ask him certain questions. I think next door neighbor guy, he did too. And he was always like, oh, I'll get help later, or I'll go get help later. And it was like never a process that anyone follows up on. And so people get lost in the cracks. But I think a lot of that is also intentionally from the service member, that they just don't want to have to address those problems because there's a huge pride thing there, where if I'm going to get help for my mental health, people are going to look down on me, or I'm not a strong guy because of it. And so I think it's very easily manipulative that people can go through a process, and it's so basic. There's nothing extensive or intentional there for them to sit there and say, well, probably need to get them help. Because I know the next door neighbor guy, he had that issue too, and he told his wife, I'm gonna get help, I'll get help later. And his squadron never followed up with that, never tried to get through that process where they needed to be addressed. And so I think it's just very lackadaisy. There's no consistent that, or you switch squadrons, or you PCS to a different base, and then you get a whole new group of superiors. So it's very interesting, because I actually, when I one of the things I did do after Brian's death is I actually filed for the Freedom of Information Act, and I filed to find his entire case file. And I did get it. And a lot of those things, I was very surprised, because there was in there mentions that he had been suffering from PTSD, and that there was mentions that he had issues with night terrors. And that I met one of his friends that he went to FLETC with, and he said, yeah, he talked to me about it. He talked to me about what he had experienced at war. And so, like, it was in his case report that there was talks of what he had gone through, but it wasn't never to sit there and say, well, this is what caused it. It was always, well, this is just his experience and that's it, because it's such a normal thing to have happen in the military. But it's so sad, because it's like, and as a spouse, you have to sit there and watch it, or you can't force the person. I couldn't force Brian to get help. I told him that he should, and I thought, hey, if I get help, you can get help, and like, we'll get help together. But never was the case for him. He just put it off and put it off and put it off, and no one was going to force him to do it in the military. So it's just a simple process, but I do know that from his experience and how he took his life in his OSI that it changed protocols because he should have never gotten his service weapon back. They did not follow up to make sure he went to mental health, nothing, and they just said, oh, well, we believe him. And then he writes a suicide letter apologizing for manipulating them. It's like, is it really that easy in the system to do that to people?
It's almost like
But
they just don't take it seriously enough, you know?
it's no.
Said he's fine, it's
They
fine. No,
inflict the
that's what the there
PTSD, the trauma.
yeah. So, well, I guess before we close out, what advice do you have for anybody else that may be going through this?
I always say this, and this is something I've always been, and every day I say this: perseverance is key. How you choose to persevere. I've made the decision in my life to not let that circumstance or that situation define who I am as an individual. I have learned to take that trauma and find strength within myself. And I think perseverance and what's most important is how you pick up those pieces and you carry on with your life. And I see people in all different walks of life either live in that moment constantly of I'm always going to be a widow, this is my husband, and they always live in that memory. I was 25, I'm too young, and I was too young to sit there and say, well, that's my life at 25 and I'm no longer going to be an individual. I have taken the tools and resources that I have experienced through my mental health journey to continue to persevere. I built up a business. My goal is to now pay it forward and give other people resources and tools. But I think perseverance, you can't let it define your life as an individual because you have so much more life to live and there's so much more out there for you to experience to be controlled by that one time. So I've had to take a lot of hard looks at myself to take the accountability where I felt like I needed to, but also know that I'm not accountable for other people's mistakes. And so doing the woulda, coulda, shouldas is not helpful for me to continue to analyze and overanalyze. And so I take one day at a time. I find blessings every single day. I show and practice gratitude with my life by going to the beach, feeling the appreciation for myself that I am doing a good job. I am humble enough to appreciate every day that I have now because of that experience. And so even though I had to say goodbye to him in the most horrific way, I have learned to be at peace with myself. And I think that was the one part of my journey after he died is I wanted to be at peace with myself. And I think that that's a loaded statement that can be unpacked with a lot of emotions and feelings, because if you want to find peace within yourself, you're going to have to take a couple hard, good looks at yourself, but also understand that the serenity prayer, you only can accept the things you can, and the courage to know the difference by learning to accept the things you can and not able to change things you cannot, and understanding that there is a difference between those two and that you don't have to carry the weight of your shoulders. And there is support. I'm sure there are support groups out there, and I'm sure there is resources out there. If you look online, there's tons of opportunities for people to get help, get into counseling or group counseling. TAPS is a great organization that really gives back to people and tries to help the fallen and to help them move on with their lives or, grow within themselves. I think my one thing is perseverance. Choosing to persevere through everything that you have and learning that you have more to live in your life. And sometimes it can be really tough, but for the most part, it's all about perspective. It's all about perspective and how you choose to live your life and being positive and humble. I'm so humbled. I don't take my days for granted anymore. I don't waste them away because I know how valuable it is now.
Anything else you want to mention before we end this?
I hope that my story is shared and that people can learn from it.
I very much appreciate you sharing it and being so honest with me. I'm so sorry that you had to go through all that. And unless we talk about it, that's the only way we can prevent other people from having to go through this same type of stuff. So thank you for
Yeah,
sharing.
I really hope no one ever has to experience saying goodbye to their loved one like I did. I think that's the one thing I would love to hopefully prevent anyone else from that trauma, because it's hard enough to say goodbye to your loved one, but it's even harder with people blaming you or the process isn't following the right way, and like you are left to the wind and being forgotten because we shouldn't be forgotten. We are a living legacy to them, and we are important people too.
Absolutely. My conversation with Lyndsey opened my eyes, and I hope it did the same for you. Grief can split families apart, often because of raw feelings and misunderstandings. By giving family members like Lyndsey space to tell their truth, we're reminded that there's always more to the story. In hard moments, choosing not to assume the worst about each other can be the kindest thing we do. We also talked about new treatment options like ETMS. If you're a veteran, a first responder, or anyone living with heavy depression or PTSD, please know there are paths forward. Talk to a qualified clinician. You are not alone. If you or someone you love is in crisis, call 988, press 1 for the Veterans Crisis Line, or text 838-255. Now, as we always do, let's raise a glass and toast Brian. Tonight, we raise our glasses to Tech Sergeant Brian Theobald. Brian was a son of Pittsburgh, a proud American, a diehard fan of the Steelers, Penguins, and Pirates. He was also a teammate, a husband, and a father who carried himself with strength and loyalty in everything he did. He joined the Air Force as a teenager and by 19 was already serving in Iraq. He endured burn pits, prison camps, and the chaos of combat zones, experiences that left invisible scars but never diminished his sense of duty. He served 2 tours overseas during Operation Iraqi Freedom and Operation Enduring Freedom, giving nearly 9 years of his life to the Air Force. Driven by his brothers and best friends, Brian set his sights on becoming a special agent with the Office of Special Investigations. In 2014, he achieved that dream, a testament to his work ethic, courage, and commitment. On paper, his career was impeccable. In reality, he carried trauma that the system too often ignored. In 2010, he married his soulmate Lyndsey, and later that year, they welcomed their daughter. His dedication to his family was always top-notch. His little girl was his light, his anchor, the reason he kept fighting through the shadows of PTSD. On July 21st, 2015, Brian lost his battle with those unseen wounds. He was just 27 years old. But his life is not defined by that day. His legacy is in the love he gave his wife and daughter. It's in the teammates who looked up to him, the brothers who inspired him, and the countless people he trained and protected along the way. As we toast Brian, we also remind ourselves of the lesson Lyndsey shared, that we must look deeper, set aside assumptions, and recognize that behind every service member is a full, complicated, beautiful life worth remembering. So let us honor Brian not only as a fallen airman, but as a man who lived with purpose, who loved deeply, and who achieved his dream. May his story remind us to support those still fighting battles we cannot see, and to carry forward the legacies of the ones we've lost. Say their name, Tech Sergeant Brian Theobald. A special thank you to our Gold Star Story supporters, Terry Mullins, Danielle Mettle, Jackie Mullins, June Latendry, Edie Howard, Bob and Pat Scott, Mary Jo Stoy, Helen Krupp, Georgia Franco, Jess Miller, and Aaron Peck. You can support our work at goldstarStoriesUSA.com or buymeacoffee.com/goldstarstories. Every bit helps us keep the mic on for families like Lyndsey's. Until next time, look after your people.